So, I want you to just imagine for a second, right? You're standing out there in the blazing heat of the Egyptian desert, and you're staring up at this massive block of solid, rose-colored granite.
And we really need to emphasize this isn't just a normal block of stone.
Right. No, this thing weighs like 70 tons, which, just to put that in perspective, that's the weight of about 35 mid-sized cars, all compressed into this single, unyielding cube.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to visualize that kind of density.
Exactly. Now imagine someone taps you on the shoulder and is like, all right, we need to move this. We got to move it 500 miles across rough terrain and then lift it hundreds of feet into the air.
Good luck with that.
Right. And on top of that, you have to place it next to another block so perfectly, so seamlessly that you can't even slide a piece of paper between them.
I mean, honestly, that sounds like a logistical nightmare even for a modern engineering firm today. Like, even with hydraulic cranes and laser-guided transport.
Exactly. If you asked a contractor to do that right now, they'd want, a massive budget, years of planning, heavy machinery. But conventional history tells us this was done over 4,000 years ago.
Right. With copper chisels and hemp ropes.
Yeah, and just thousands of people pulling sleds across the sand.
Which, that is the orthodox view. It's that comforting linear progression of human history we're all taught in school.
Right. We started with basic tools, figured out how to stack stones, and, eventually built skyscrapers.
But when you actually stand there, when you really look at the raw physical reality of the Great Pyramid of Giza, that neat linear story starts to feel, well, pretty inadequate.
It totally falls apart. The blueprint is missing. And those standard explanations we've just accepted for so long, they start looking incredibly flimsy under a microscope.
And that is exactly the friction point we're exploring today. It's the muddy waters where mainstream archaeology collides with architectural anomalies that just shouldn't exist, not if the orthodox timeline is true.
Right. And we are not just dipping our toes into those muddy waters today. We're diving straight to the bottom. So if you're the kind of person who loves, dismantling fundamental assumptions just to see how they tick, you are absolutely in the right place.
Because today's source material is heavy.
Oh, it is. We are cracking open this profoundly dense, highly provocative document. It's titled The Great Pyramid Codes Aeternum Nexus V15 by George James Dukas. And our mission for this deep dive, to impartially explore a radically alternative framework for understanding what the Great Pyramid actually is.
And we should be very clear about the territory we're entering here. We are stepping far, far outside the bounds of conventional Egyptology.
Miles outside.
Yeah. Dukas is asking us to examine a unified model that blends, quantum physics, acoustic engineering, sacred geometry, and a completely alternative view of ancient history.
Yeah, the core premise here, and you really need to brace yourself because it is a wild one, is that the Great Pyramid is not a tomb. It was never a tomb.
No.
The author proposes it's actually a 15,000-year-old dimensional seal, a harmonic vault. And get this, an active anti-gravity resonator built by a highly advanced pre-flood civilization.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. Now, just to set some ground rules for our deep dive today, we're going to treat the claims in this framework very seriously to understand the internal logic of the theory. But, and this is a big but, we are not endorsing these alternative historical or physical viewpoints as definitive scientific fact.
Exactly. We're just impartially reporting on the content.
Right. We're here to unpack these mind-bending ideas from the source material and see how they challenge the way we look at the ancient world.
And, what makes Dukas's work so compelling isn't just the bold claims. I mean, anyone can say, magic did it, or aliens did it.
Right. The internet is full of that.
Exactly. But this document is an exhaustive, rigorous attempt to back those claims up. He's using specific mathematical constants, exact acoustic measurements, and architectural data that, frankly, modern science is only just now starting to verify with things like muon radiography.
Yeah, it forces us to ask this massive what if. What if the pyramid wasn't built with ramps and slave labor, but with, sound waves, human breath, and the mathematics of consciousness itself?
It's a beautiful, terrifying question.
It really is.
Yeah.
But to even entertain that what if, we can't just jump into the esoteric stuff right away. We have to start with the physical reality of the structure. We need to understand why the mainstream narrative is cracking in the first place.
Well, the physical anomalies really are the anchor point here. Dukas emphasizes that we aren't just wondering about some vague mystery. We're looking at 2 centuries of accumulated, highly precise data.
Right.
And that data has just grown too precise to casually brush off with the old, they just worked really hard explanation.
Let's talk about that precision, because I mentioned the 70-ton granite blocks earlier. Mainstream Egyptology admits these blocks formed the king's chamber, right? And they also admit these stones came from the Aswan quarries.
Which is roughly 500 miles south of Giza.
500 miles. And the Orthodox explanation is what? They loaded these incredibly dense stones onto wooden barges and just floated them down the Nile.
Down the river during the inundation season, yeah. That's the standard theory.
Which, okay, I get that buoyancy's a thing, but getting a 70-ton block onto a wooden barge without flipping it over and then offloading it, dragging it up a plateau, and lifting it hundreds of feet into the core of a pyramid.
That's definitely where the friction starts. But even if we accept the barge theory for a second, the true anomaly is in the dressing of the stones. How they were cut and fitted.
Oh, the casing stones.
Exactly. Dukas points to these casing stones. These were the highly polished, slanted stones that originally covered the outside, making the whole thing gleam white in the sun.
Most of those got stripped away to build Cairo, right?
Yeah, centuries ago. But a few remain at the base. And the measurements on those remaining stones are just staggering. The document notes they were fitted with joint gaps averaging 0.020 inches.
Which, for anyone trying to visualize that, that's 0.5 millimeters.
To give that context, a standard credit card is about 0.76 millimeters thick.
So we are talking about fitting 2 massive, multi-ton, jagged boulders together so perfectly that you literally cannot slide a credit card between them.
Right.
And this isn't just on one edge. This precision goes across hundreds of feet of surface area deep into the core of the structure. I mean, why, if you're just building a memorial for a dead pharaoh, why do you need microscopic precision?
That is the pivotal question he asks. In traditional construction, especially for something brute force like a burial mound, that level of precision is a massive waste of time and energy. You just need it to look nice on the outside and not collapse.
All right.
But Dukas argues that this extreme joint precision had nothing to do with aesthetics. He says it was structurally required for long-term standing wave coherence.
Okay, standing wave coherence. So we're pivoting from architecture straight into acoustics.
Precisely. This introduces what the text calls the sealed vault theory. Because the conventional narrative is that the Great Pyramid was heavily sealed to keep grave robbers out. That's why there are these massive granite plugs blocking the passageways.
But the robbers got in anyway, right? Mainstream history says Al-Mamun's men tunneled in around the 9th century and found it totally empty. No mummy, no gold, just a bare granite box.
Right, which Orthodox historians explain away by saying earlier, undocumented robbers must have gotten in somehow, even though there's no real evidence of a prior breach.
Yeah, it's a convenient excuse.
But Dukas flips the script completely. He argues the pyramid was never meant to keep grave robbers out. It was meant to keep a specific internal frequency in.
Oh, wow. That fundamentally changes how you look at every single hallway and shaft in that building.
It does. Think about the internal architecture through the lens of acoustics rather than security. You've got the descending passage blocked by massive granite plugs. You have the so-called air shafts.
Right, the ones people thought were for ventilation.
Exactly. But modern robotics have shown those shafts don't actually circulate air to the outside. They terminate in sealed stone blocks, some with little copper fittings.
And then there's the antechamber, right before the king's chamber, with that elaborate portcullis system. The mainstream theory says it was a trapdoor system to drop granite slabs and permanently seal the king's chamber after the burial.
Yeah. But Dukas points out that this is a multi-layered, highly engineered ceiling architecture. And look at the materials. The outside was covered in Tura limestone, which is highly water resistant. But the deep interior, specifically the king's chamber and the plugs, are made of dense granite.
Which has different properties.
Very different. Granite is high in quartz, it's pressure resistant, and vibrationally it's incredibly stable.
So they weren't building a tomb, they were building like a containment vessel.
A resonance capsule. The document compares it to a Faraday cage.
Okay, let's unpack that. A Faraday cage is an enclosure used to block electromagnetic fields, like putting your phone in one of those signal blocking bags, or how a microwave keeps the energy inside so it cooks your food and not, your kitchen.
Exactly. But instead of blocking cell signals, Dukas proposes the pyramid is a Faraday cage for harmonic frequencies. The granite plugs, the terminated shafts, those microscopic joint tolerances, they're all dimensional stabilizers.
To maintain the frequency.
Right. They were engineered to keep the internal harmonic environment in a state of suspended coherence, completely isolated from the chaotic vibrational noise of the outside world.
Suspended coherence. It's like putting a super delicate instrument in a vacuum-sealed, shock-proof case. Which, of course, brings up the obvious question. Waiting out what? Why seal it up so tightly in the first place?
And for that, the document points to a very specific geological era, the Younger Dryas.
Okay, the Younger Dryas, that's a crucial piece of this timeline.
It is. The Younger Dryas period is a well-documented phase in Earth's history, roughly 12,900 years ago. And it was characterized by this sudden, violent return to glacial conditions.
Right. It wasn't just a gentle climate shift.
No, it was catastrophic. The geological record from this time is highly anomalous. If you dig down into the Earth's strata across a bunch of different continents, you find what geologists call the Younger Dryas boundary layer. It often looks like a literal black mat in the dirt.
And within that layer, scientists have found microsphere rules, right? Which are these tiny beads of glass and metal that only form under immense heat.
Yes, along with platinum anomalies and nanodiamonds.
And those aren't things that just show up after a bad thunderstorm. Those are the fingerprints of cosmic impacts.
Precisely. The prevailing alternative hypothesis, which Dukas relies on here, is that the Earth was subjected to a barrage of comet fragments. This impact triggered massive glacial meltwater pulses, leading to sudden, catastrophic global flooding.
Which lines up with the synchronous extinction of megafauna, like the woolly mammoths, and pretty much every global flood myth in ancient cultures.
Exactly. It was a planetary reset button. And in this framework, the pyramid was built before this cataclysm. It's framed as an arc of creation.
Wait, like Noah's Ark?
Similar concept, but functionally different. We'll actually get to Dukas' analysis of Noah's Ark a bit later. But while Noah's Ark was theoretically meant to preserve biological life, the Great Pyramid wasn't built to save people or animals.
What was it saving then?
It was built to preserve the mathematical, geometric, and harmonic principles that underpin reality itself.
So it's a time capsule. But instead of burying like a box with coins and a newspaper, they buried the source code of physics.
A dimensional quarantine. That's the term Dukas uses. The theory suggests that prior to the flood, humanity had this incredibly advanced consciousness, but it became corrupted. A vibrational misalignment. So sealing the pyramid wasn't about hoarding, it was an act of divine mercy.
Mercy. How is that mercy?
Because it protected the most essential, powerful knowledge from that corruption. It held these harmonic principles in dimensional suspension, waiting out the flood and the dark ages that followed.
Waiting for humanity to evolve enough to handle it again.
Right, until we could receive that knowledge without distorting or weaponizing it.
So the fact that the pyramid is completely empty, the total silence of the king's chamber, it isn't because it was ransacked. The silence is the point.
The silence is intentional. It's a sacred restraint. The author actually states it beautifully. The vault remains sealed not because it is locked, but because humanity is out of tune with its recognition frequency.
Wow. That actually gives me chills.
Yeah. The structure doesn't resist investigation. It filters it. If you approach it with dynamite and brute force, you just hit granite plugs and dead ends. It reflects your own dense consciousness back at you.
But if you approach it with the right internal state.
Exactly. With the correct harmonic resonance, the structure is theoretically designed to recognize you.
Okay, this is an incredible concept. But, you know, my skeptical alarm bells are ringing pretty loudly right now.
That's fair. What's the hurdle?
Well, it raises a massive logical problem. If this immense machine was built before the flood, like 12 or 13,000 years ago, who built it? Because we associate it so strongly with the dynastic Egyptians. We're told Khufu built it around 2500 BCE. If it's a pre-flood machine, how did the Egyptians know what it was? Where's the instruction manual?
And that skepticism is exactly where Dukas pivots to what he calls linguistic archaeology. And this argument starts with a glaring, highly uncomfortable absence in the archaeological record.
Yes. When I read this part of the deep dive material, it honestly stopped me in my tracks.
Okay.
Because when you picture ancient Egypt, you just picture walls absolutely covered in hieroglyphs.
Right, covered in them.
But Dukas points out that the core megaliths of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, the massive valley temples, they have zero hieroglyphs on them.
None. There are no original inscriptions. No builder graffiti carving their names into the 70-ton blocks. No plaque over the door saying, Khufu built this.
Which is so completely contrary to the behavior of the later dynastic Egyptians. I mean, those people wrote on everything, every pillar, every obelisk. The later tombs are essentially intricate comic books detailing the pharaoh's greatness.
So why the absolute silence on the largest, most impressive monument they supposedly ever built? Orthodox Egyptology just argues they chose to leave it bare for stylistic reasons.
Which feels like such a massive cop-out to me.
It does, but the Aeternum Nexus theory argues something much more profound. It posits that the antediluvian, meaning pre-flood builders, didn't use written script at all. Their language wasn't phonetic, and it wasn't pictographic.
So what was it?
Their language was pure geometry and proportion.
They communicated in math and angles.
Exactly. They didn't need to write words on the wall because the form of the structure was the message. The document literally states that knowledge was encoded in form, proportion, and orientation.
And carving into the stone might have messed with the acoustics, right?
Precisely. Carving into it would have damaged the precise acoustic tuning. The silence of the stones is a functional seal.
But if they didn't write anything down, what happens when the dynastic Egyptians show up thousands of years later? Because here's where the document gets into that linguistic anomaly. Dukas points out that the ancient Egyptian language, the hieroglyphs we've actually translated, entirely lacks abstract words for basic geometric shapes.
Yes. This is a brilliant, highly specific observation. Think about the contradiction. We're told the dynastic Egyptians were the greatest architects of the ancient world. They laid out the Giza Plateau with astronomical precision.
Yeah.
Yet they don't have an abstract word in their vocabulary for triangle or circle or square.
Wait, how is that even possible? How do you build a pyramid without saying, hey guys, make sure the base is a square and the sides are triangles?
Because they used functional symbolic language, not abstract mathematical language. For example, they had the Shen ring, which is a circle with a line at the bottom symbolizing eternity. But it wasn't the abstract math concept of a geometric circle.
Okay. And the Benbin stone.
Right. The Benbin stone was a sacred conical stone symbolizing the primordial mound of creation, but they didn't use it as an abstract noun for triangle.
And the author argues this isn't just some quirky linguistic gap. It's a massive clue.
It implies they didn't invent the geometry, they inherited it.
It's like finding a tribe living inside a crashed stealth bomber.
Right.
They might worship the bomber. They might paint their own symbols on the landing gear. They might even build small replicas out of bamboo. But if you look at their language, they don't have words for aerodynamics or radar-absorbent materials or jet propulsion.
That is a perfect analogy. It's the cargo cult phenomenon.
Oh, right, like during World War II in the Pacific.
Exactly. American forces set up island bases bringing advanced goods cargo. When the military left, the indigenous people built mock airstrips and bamboo airplanes, hoping to magically summon the cargo back. They perfectly mimicked the form of the technology, but they completely lacked the understanding of the mechanics.
And Dukas is essentially saying the dynastic Egyptians were a magnificent, highly spiritual cargo cult. They arrived on the Giza Plateau after the floodwaters receded and just found these massive, perfectly resonant, geometrically flawless structures sitting there.
Right. They didn't possess the mathematical language to invent them, so they did what any culture would do. They claimed them. They overlaid their own mythology and gods onto the monuments.
And they tried to emulate them, which completely explains the bizarre regression in Egyptian architecture.
Yes, the regression is key.
If you look at the Great Pyramid, it's perfect. But the pyramids built 1,000 years later, like the mud brick pyramids of the Middle Kingdom. They are literally crumbling into dust. They're built with smaller, standardized blocks, using obvious copper tools, and crucially, those later pyramids are absolutely covered in hieroglyphs.
It's a completely different, vastly inferior technology compared to the laser-flat, uninscribed megaliths of Giza. They were building bamboo airplanes based on the stealth bomber they found.
Wow, okay, so the dynastic Egyptians were squatters who inherited a machine they couldn't turn on. But that still leaves us with a huge problem. If the original pre-flood builders didn't leave a written instruction manual, how is anyone supposed to know how the machine actually works? I mean, you can't just stare at a massive stone triangle until it does something.
And that is exactly why Dukas forces us to look at the math, because in this framework, the instruction manual isn't missing at all. It's written in the only language that survives cataclysms.
The universal language.
Right. The language that doesn't rely on human translation. It's written in the fundamental equations of consciousness itself. The text calls this foundational layer the Aeternum Nexus.
So let's dive into that math.
Mm-hmm.
And I promise you, listening right now, we are not going to turn this into a dry high school calculus lecture.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to understand these numbers, because the text argues they are the literal operating system of reality.
Dukas points to one specific universal equation that supposedly governs everything. The quadratic equation 6 pi 2 by 1 equals LR.
Right. And again, no pop quizzes, but when you solve that specific equation, you get two very special numbers. The positive solution is phi, which is approximately 1.618. We know this as the golden ratio. And a negative solution is psi, approximately negative 0.618, the golden conjugate.
Now, in conventional math, phi is famous. It dictates the spiral of galaxies, hurricane formations, the arrangement of leaves, human body proportions.
Da Vinci used it, right?
Exactly. It's the mathematical signature of organic growth. But the Aeternum Nexus theory takes phi and psi much, much further than just it makes things look pretty.
They aren't just numbers that show up in sunflowers.
No, in this framework, they are the active operational keys of reality. The text states that phi, the 1.618, represents velocity, specifically the outward motion and creation of physical form, and psi represents time, the inward reciprocal balancing force.
Velocity and time, not as separate concepts we measure with clocks, but as inseparable mathematical reflections of each other.
Exactly. And the Great Pyramid is a physical manifestation of these numbers. If you take the perimeter of the pyramid's base and divide it by its height, you get 2 pi's with astonishing accuracy.
And if you take the ratio of the slant height to half the base length, it equals phi exactly.
Right, the building itself is the equation. But Dukas goes even deeper. He tries to explain how reality actually starts from absolute nothingness. He talks about the primordial void.
Okay, the primordial void. This is mind-bending. Before there is geometry, before numbers, before the universe, there's just pure, undifferentiated awareness, the void.
But it's not an empty nothingness, it's a pregnant nothingness. The text argues the first act of creation is a binary division. The void splits into two orientations, 0 and nanograde.
Wait, 0 and 90. If I type that into my calculator, it just says 0. How can nothing have a negative version of itself?
Because in standard math, 0 is just a placeholder. It's the absence of value. But Dukas is talking about the geometry of awareness. He argues the universe begins with the emergence of directional polarity within nothingness itself.
Okay, let me try an analogy. It's like a magnet, right? A magnet has a north pole and a south pole. If you add them together, they balance out to 0. So you have a structure, a polarity, but the net value is 0. Is he saying the void itself polarized like a magnet?
That is an excellent way to visualize it. It's an orientation of intent. And then these oriented void states, the 0 and nanozero, generate their reflections, stepping out into existence as 1 and magus 1. Now you have a fourfold spectrum of potential.
0, nanozero, 1, and magus 1.
Yes. And when these pairs interact, the void component is essentially masked, and the orientation collapses into discrete measurable values. 1 and negative 1. Tangible numbers are born.
Reality snaps into focus.
Exactly. The profound argument here is that numbers themselves are not fundamental. They are the frozen structures of a deeper, fluid polarity. And this entire process is seeded by a mathematical function called Euler's Basel identity.
Okay, Euler's Basel identity. I stare at this in the document. It's an infinite series, right? It says if you take the inverse squares of all whole numbers, so 11 plus 14 plus 19 plus 116 on to infinity, all those fractions miraculously add up to exactly pi 2 dan 6 sevenths.
Which is mind-boggling on its own. Pi is the ratio of a circle. Where is the circle in a list of straight fractions?
The universe is hiding circles inside straight lines.
Exactly. Dukas treats this pi 2d2 wave as an algebraic seed. It forces the void to polarize. But the craziest part of this section is how he takes this concept of pi 2d2 and completely redefines entropy.
Yes. Let's talk about entropy. Usually when physicists talk about entropy, it's pretty depressing. It's the law that everything eventually decays. A hot cup of coffee gets cold, stars burn out. Disorder always increases.
But the Aeternum Nexus forcefully rejects that. Dukas presents a profound equation, pi 2 equation will 1 plus.
Let's break that math down. Pi squared is roughly 9.869. So the equation is basically saying 9.869 equals 1 plus 8.869. Mathematically, sure, that's obvious, but what does it actually mean?
In this framework, the 1 represents our discrete, visible universe. Every star, every planet, every human being.
So our entire physical reality is just the number 1.
Yes. And the remainder, the pi 211, which is about 8.869, Dukas calls harmonic presence. He argues entropy is not waste or decay. Entropy is the hidden structural foundation of reality.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. Are you saying the invisible foundation of the universe is nearly 9 times larger than the physical universe itself?
Yes. Think of an iceberg.
Oh, okay. The physical universe is the 10% of the ice we see above the water.
Exactly. And the 8.869 is the massive 90% beneath the surface. It's not wasted ice. It's the structural support that allows the tip to be visible. Dukas is saying what physicists call dark energy, the missing mass of the universe, is actually this harmonic presence.
Wow. So let's ground this for a second. What does this all mean for the person listening right now on their commute or doing the dishes? Why should they care about pi squared and the void splitting in half?
Because it means that math is not a human invention. We didn't make it up to calculate taxes. Math is the literal, objective language of divine consciousness.
It's the source code.
It is the source code. And the Great Pyramid, sitting in the sand with its geometry encoding pi and phi, is essentially the universe speaking its own source code in stone. It's a three-dimensional grammar textbook.
It physically demonstrates the principles of creation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have the hardware, this massive resonant stone structure, and we have the software code, the universal math. But here's the rub. A machine doesn't just run because it has code. My laptop has an operating system, but I still have to hit the power button. You have to interface with it. If there are no levers to pull or dials to turn in the Great Pyramid, how do you boot the Aeternum Nexus up?
And that is exactly where conventional archaeology hits a brick wall. They're looking for a physical key or a hidden door, but Dukas claims the interface isn't a tool you hold in your hand.
The interface is us, the human body, and the human voice.
Specifically, the harmonic signature of coherent human consciousness. The pyramid requires an operator, and the operator's biometric password is sound.
Let's look at the acoustic measurements Dukas provides, because this grounds the esoteric math in measurable reality. Acoustic testing inside the King's Chamber found that the room has a natural resonant standing wave.
Yes, a fundamental frequency of exactly 16.2 hertz.
16.2 hertz, which is infrasound. Human hearing bottoms out around 20 hertz. You can't hear 16.2, but you feel it in your bones.
It interacts with biological rhythms, but it goes further. Inside that chamber is the granite sarcophagus. Acoustic research shows that this specific granite box resonates optimally between 114 and 122 hertz.
And what natural biological instrument sits perfectly within that 114 to 122 hertz range?
The lower fundamental range of the adult male voice.
I mean, that cannot be a coincidence.
Dukas argues it's absolutely not a coincidence. The chamber and the sarcophagus were acoustically engineered as a coupled system specifically for human vocal resonance.
It's like the King's Chamber is a biometric scanner, but instead of scanning your fingerprint, it scans your breath print. It evaluates the coherence and frequency of your consciousness through the sound waves you produce.
The author states, the chamber doesn't ask, can you open me, but can you match me? If the breath print fits the mathematical locks of the room, recognition follows.
So how do you generate the right breath print? You can't just hum a pop song. The text provides a specific operational protocol, a musical chord, the major triad, C, E, G.
In Western music, the C major triad is the most foundational, stable chord. But Dukas maps these notes to specific frequencies, vowel sounds, and geometric shapes within the pyramid.
Right. The root note C is mapped to the vowel sound ooh, like in moon. It resonates at roughly 172 hertz. He associates this with Earth, the square, and the subterranean chamber. It's the grounding tone.
Then you move up to the major third, the note E, mapped to the vowel ooh, like in boat, around 165 hertz. This represents fire, the triangle, and the Queen's Chamber, the emotional center.
And finally, the perfect fifth, the note G, mapped to O, like in father, around 198 hertz, representing spirit, the circle, and the King's Chamber, the ascension.
Ooh, oh. But you can't just blurt these out. The protocol requires deep diaphragmatic breathing, synchronized with your heartbeat, and it must follow the Fibonacci sequence.
Wait, really? The Fibonacci sequence?
Yeah, 2 seconds for ooh, 3 seconds for oh, and 5 seconds for oh.
Why those specific numbers?
Because the Fibonacci sequence 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 naturally approaches the golden ratio, phi. By timing your breath to 2, 3, and 5 seconds, your physical breath literally spirals toward divine proportion. Your body aligns with the cosmic math built into the stone.
Okay, here is where this deep dive gets really interesting for me. Because reading a theoretical breathing manual is one thing, but Dukas points to a real-world vocal blueprint that perfectly matches this sequence from a totally different part of the world.
The ancient Vedic traditions of India.
Specifically, a mantra passed down by the 11th century Hindu philosopher Ramanuja, Om Namo Narayana.
Let's break that down phonetically because the parallel is staggering.
He argues that Om correlates perfectly to the U sound, the root C note. Namo correlates to O, the heart, the E note, and Narayana correlates to Ah, the crown, the G note.
And when chanted traditionally by a trained practitioner, it naturally falls into that exact 2-3-5 Fibonacci rhythm.
So Dukas is claiming this Vedic mantra is a sonic remnant, a portable acoustic key from the pre-flood world that survived through oral tradition, matching the architecture locked into the Great Pyramid.
Exactly. The builders put the knowledge into stone in Egypt. The sages put the exact same knowledge into sound in India. Same operating system.
Because the chamber doesn't open to force, it only opens to harmonic recognition.
And this brings up a crucial ethical point in Dukas' theory. Why build a machine that only turns on with a specific breath print? Why not just build a switch?
To keep the wrong people out. It's a security system.
The ultimate security system. Dukas argues the pre-flood civilization achieved immense technological power, but their consciousness degraded. They lacked the spiritual wisdom to wield it, leading to their destruction. The pyramid's biometric seals are a failsafe.
By requiring a mathematically precise state of consciousness, they ensured the machine wouldn't work for a tyrant.
Precisely. You can't fake a mathematically perfect 165 Hz O for exactly 3 seconds if your nervous system is full of greed or panic. Your microtremors will distort the waves. The technology is self-limiting.
It's consciousness-mediated technology. If a warlord tries to use it, the room just stays a cold stone room.
It demands evolution before it grants power.
Okay, let's play this out. Let's say you do it. You're an initiate. You stand in the king's chamber, calm your heart rate, breathe in the Fibonacci sequence, and hit the CEG triad perfectly. Your breath print is accepted, what actually happens, because Dukas claims it results in actual mechanical output, gravity modulation.
Right. This is where we transition from acoustic resonance into applied theoretical physics. And we have to pay close attention to the mechanisms.
Because there isn't just one triadic sequence. We talked about the major triad, CEG, which he calls the existence triad, but then he introduces the essence triad.
The sharp triad. C sharp, A sharp.
And the document says this sharp triad handles dimensional lift. These two distinct chords work together to manipulate gravity in different ways.
Let's start with the foundational CEG chord, because this explains how the pyramid was actually built, how those 70-ton blocks were moved. Dukas says the CEG triad induces acoustic wave cancellation.
Now, how does a sound wave interact with solid rock? It comes down to the quartz and the granite. Quartz is highly piezoelectric.
Right, let's explain piezoelectricity. If you squeeze a piece of quartz or apply mechanical stress, it generates an electrical charge, like the spark in a push-button lighter. A tiny hammer hits the crystal, creates high voltage, and sparks the gas.
And if you run electricity through quartz, it vibrates, like in a quartz watch.
Yeah.
So granite is basically a rock embedded with billions of tiny electrical generators, and sound waves are just mechanical pressure.
So the theory is that the specific sound waves of the CEG triad propagate deeply into the atomic lattice of the granite. The piezoelectric effect translates these acoustic waves into electromagnetic fields within the stone.
But this isn't just shaking the stone, right? You can't acoustically levitate 70 tons.
No, Dukas describes it as phase conjugate interference. The frequencies are tuned to perfectly mirror and cancel out the existing vibrational noise of the stone's atomic mass. It neutralizes the stone's inertial coupling to the Earth.
Okay, is it like noise-canceling headphones but for gravity?
That is exactly what he is describing.
Because those headphones listen to the airplane engine hum and generate the exact opposite anti-wave. The waves collide and cancel out, creating silence. You're saying they play the exact opposite frequency of the stone's mass to create gravitational silence.
Yes, a mechanical cancellation. The stone ceases to interact with the Earth's gravitational field. It effectively becomes weightless.
Which completely solves the engineering nightmare we started with. They didn't need cranes. They tuned the blocks until they weighed nothing and just guided them into place.
That's the existence triad. It renders matter neutral. But the essence triad, the SRC progression, does something far more radical.
Right, because neutralizing gravity is one thing, but Dukas says this sharp triad creates active repulsion. True directional anti-gravity.
He introduces a complex field equation here. He argues the S-A-sharp triad creates an inverse arctangent envelope. And when combined with positive ion flow, it modulates the local gravitational potential.
Okay, explain an inverse arctangent envelope like I'm a high schooler.
Think of a sine wave rolling up and down smoothly. An arctangent curve is different. It starts flat, rises sharply, and then flattens out at a higher level. It represents a boundary crossing. Duca says generating a wave field in this shape creates a boundary that gravity cannot penetrate.
It creates an upward pointing gradient. The text writes it as del phi equals positive g.
Exactly. Gravity normally pulls everything inward. This waveform prevents that collapse. It holds space open. Within this field, gravity becomes a field of outward pressure.
Active anti-gravity propulsion. That is incredible. But I have to push back here. If this requires complex wave modulation and precision ion flow, how did human beings direct this? Were they just singing F-sharp at a 70-ton boulder?
It's a fair point. Human voices radiate everywhere. You need a focusing mechanism. And Ducas provides an answer. A radical reinterpretation of the Egyptian was scepter.
Oh, the was scepter. It's in every hieroglyph, held by gods like Anubis and the pharaohs. It looks like a staff with an animal head and a two-pronged fork. Mainstream archaeology says it's purely symbolic.
But the Aeternum Nexus argues the original was scepters were highly functional, high-tech tools. They were modulating tuning forks.
The document describes them having specific metallurgy. A bronze fork tuned to C, a piezoelectric quartz shaft for E, and a silver and quartz head for G.
The idea is that it was an acoustic waveguide. The operator uses their breath to initiate the field, but holds the was scepter as an amplifier to project the phase-locked wave directly into the stones.
So it's a resonant wand used to steer massive blocks with zero-point precision. This finally explains the 0.5 millimeter gaps. Well, if you drag a 70-ton block with ropes, you can't make micro-adjustments. When it drops, it drops. But if the block weighs 0 pounds, you can gently slide it into place with your hands, guided by the was scepter. You slide them together like butter.
And this brings us back to the macro scale. Ducas argues the pyramid isn't just a building constructed with this technology. The pyramid is this technology, scaled up to planetary proportions. A planetary gravity tuning cavity.
A planetary gravity tuning cavity. Okay, this leads to one of the most mind-expanding connections in the document.
Okay.
Because if this technology existed before the cataclysm, was the Great Pyramid the only place it was used?
This is where Ducas connects the physics to another foundational survival myth, Noah's Ark.
Let's talk about the Ark. People usually view the Ark and the pyramids as totally separate, but the document pulls the exact biblical proportions. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high.
Which seem arbitrary for a big boat. But if you reduce those numbers to their foundational ratios, you get 10 to 1.67 to 1.
And 1.67 is incredibly close to 1.618, the golden ratio, phi.
Ducas maps these dimensions to the musical progression. The height, the 1, is the root C. The vertical axis. The width, the 1.67, is the A. The spiral outward motion of phi. And the length, the 10, is the G.
A CAG chord progression built into a vessel. The harmonic signature of a temporal spiral.
This is a paradigm-shattering shift. Ducas asserts Noah's Ark was not just a wooden boat floating on water.
Right, and logically it couldn't have been. If the Younger Dryas flood was a cosmic cataclysm with meteor impacts and miles-high tidal waves, a wooden boat would be pulverized in 5 minutes.
Exactly. The kinetic energy would destroy it. The author proposes the Ark was a mobile, Faraday-like cavity resonator, a portable vehicular version of the King's Chamber.
A submarine for reality.
Yes. By utilizing those 10.1.67.1 proportions and specific internal resonant materials, the Ark functioned as a scalar envelope.
Just like the pyramid, decoupling its interior density from the collapsing planetary field outside.
And here's the astonishing claim. The text introduces temporal stasis. By establishing this decoupled field, the occupants entered a fundamentally different relationship with time.
The part of the text that says time is memory.
Yes. Time is a function of gravitational and harmonic density. The 40 days and 40 nights wasn't the objective time that passed on Earth.
Wait, are you saying the 40 days was the subjective time experienced inside the scalar bubble of the Ark?
Precisely. Inside the perfect cavity, they experienced 40 days of temporal stasis, a quiet waiting period. But outside, the Earth underwent massive upheaval, and perhaps millennia passed before the planet stabilized.
That is staggering. The Ark skipped across a dimensional rupture. It was a time machine.
A temporal lifeboat. And just like the pyramid, it required consciousness stabilization to operate. Noise, like panic or fear, would destabilize the standing wave system and collapse the density bubble.
If you panic, the shield drops and the floodwaters crush you. You need rigorous harmonic discipline to keep the field intact.
Which reframes the idea of only the righteous being saved. It wasn't a moral judgment, it was a biophysical requirement. Only those capable of unwavering harmonic stillness could survive the transit.
Wow. So the Ark and the Great Pyramid are two halves of the same divine survival plan. The Ark ferries biological life across the cataclysm, and the Pyramid ferries the mathematical source code.
Twin harmonic seals, both requiring the correct breath print of elevated human consciousness.
I feel like my brain just ran a marathon. We've covered an unbelievable amount of ground, from 0.5 millimeter gaps and the Younger Dryas to linguistic archaeology and pre-linguistic geometry.
We dove into the Aeternum Nexus equation, the primordial void, and redefined entropy as harmonic presence.
We looked at the acoustic measurements, the 16.2 hertz standing wave, the CEG triad, and the Fibonacci breathing matching the Vedic Om Namah Narayana mantra.
We examined phase conjugate interference, anti-gravity repulsion through the West Scepter, and finally Noah's Ark as a mobile dimensional transit vehicle.
It is a breathtaking synthesis. The Aeternum Nexus completely discards the linear timeline of human civilization.
It presents a vision where the ultimate technology isn't a machine made of gears, it's human consciousness. The pyramid teaches us that we aren't separate beings trying to manipulate dead matter.
We are co-creators. We're built using the exact same mathematical language that the universe uses to speak itself into existence. The stone listens to us because it's made of the same math as our breath.
Under this framework, the Great Pyramid becomes an active, waiting invitation for humanity to remember its dimensional capabilities.
And that brings us directly back to you, the learner, because this text asks a very personal question. It asks you to consider that your body, the rhythm of your breath, and your focused intentions are literally the keys to manipulating space and time.
It challenges us to realize that the noise of our daily lives, the anxiety, the distraction, is the exact vibrational dissonance that keeps us locked in a limited reality.
Think about the physical spaces you inhabit every single day. If a structure as massive as the Great Pyramid was engineered to yield only to a specific, coherent frequency of human breath and thought, what hidden dimensions of your own daily reality are currently locked away, simply waiting for you to find the right internal frequency to open them?
The orthodox view of history is cracking. We are looking at a dormant, resonant field waiting for an operator.
The muddy waters of our history are actually just waiting for the right song to clear them. Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Take a deep breath, find your frequency, and we will leave you to explore that resonance on your own.